What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run a 5-week program at the Inner Knowing School for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals, a number of practical tools and frameworks for creating an intuition practice and for self mastery. You can find more at theinnerknowingschool.com. I have a master's certification in intuition medicine, and I've condensed 10 plus years of experience and research navigating how to harness your energy and intuition in an easy to access live curated course. Now, as someone who's helped countless creatives, entrepreneurs, and many who are just plain stuck, open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I've seen this strategy transform people's inner states and external reality. And the best part is that you'll skyrocket your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly live to overcome your limiting beliefs and show you how to manage your energy instead of your time. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition based on some of the top tools and frameworks that I've developed. And you'll get access to guided meditations and visualizations not available anywhere else. This method is so effective that even if you don't have that much time, or if you think that you might not be ready, this will work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can check out what past clients had to say about the program. Wishing you all many blessings ahead. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Blood Moon Box, a monthly subscription box service for period pads and tampons to help support all humans who have a cycle for that time of the month, and no need to run to a store to mix and match period supplies that don't cater to the entire ebbs and flows of your cycle. There are 2 box options based on your cycle, light and medium, and then heavy. And in addition to the period products, you'll also receive PMS herbal teas, a candle, and some other items for your time of the month. You can reserve a box by navigating to bloodmoonbox.com. And bloodmoonbox.com is on a mission to destigmatize the idea of period blood. At Blood Moon Box, they believe that it is the time to honor the enchanting magic within every person who has a cycle. So join us in embracing the magic of your cycle with Blood Moon Box. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. On today's episode, I'll be speaking with Allie McFee, a certified women's health educator, womb priestess, and tantric practitioner. Allie guides leaders deeper into their purpose by accessing the wisdom of their wombs, expanding into abundance via body-based pleasure rituals and somatic expression, and establishing hormonal balance with nutrition at moderngoddesslifestyle.com. She also certifies womb healers to lead rituals that liberate divine feminine energy in her retreats and online academy, Juicy Feminine Leadership Academy. You can check her out on Instagram at Modern Goddess Lifestyle, and I am so excited to talk to her. I actually had the pleasure of attending her workshop on moon cycle nutrition and womb health at Lightning in a Bottle, and I just found it so incredibly informative, and I just found her so awesome. So welcome to the show, Allie.
Thank you, Yasmin. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so grateful you attended my workshop and we get to connect further now.
Likewise. I took so many notes at your workshop. I was like writing down every single thing that you said. It was so informative, and I'm actually applying a lot of what you discussed in my day-to-day and my week-to-week based on my cycle. So I'm super excited to share this information with our audience. But to kick it off, Allie, can you tell us why understanding how our menstrual cycle and nutrition is so important?
Absolutely. So our menstrual cycle, when we really understand what's happening with our hormonal rhythms, we can work in harmony with our cycle rather than against it. And for so many years, I didn't understand that we had 4 distinct hormonal shifts. I thought I was either on my period or off my period. And This information didn't come to me until I had a health crisis. There was one point in my life, it was in 2015, that I had 2-week long periods. I was bleeding 14 days every single month, and this went on for about a year. And at the time, I was a chef, so I already had a deep love affair with food. And when I got my diagnosis of estrogen dominance, low progesterone, high cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and so many women experience that in our modern stressful society, many women have that diagnosis. I didn't want to go the medical route. I wanted to see how food could support my body in bringing it back into balance, how I could restore my hormonal balance from the inside out. So, what I learned is that we have these 4 distinct phases, and we go through these hormonal shifts. And as that's happening, our body requires different minerals, vitamins, nutrients that are going to support our hormones in that phase that we're in. And it's going to help maximize our energy, our libido, our vitality. And so, when I started eating in rhythm with my cycle, the first thing that happened is these incredibly long periods ended up reducing. And now I have 3 to 5 day periods, which I absolutely love. And also, what I found was food really became a ritual for me, a way to honor my feminine flow and really understand myself from the inside out. I used to have a lot of emotional challenges around how I was feeling internally and how I felt my work or the external was expecting me to show up in terms of my energy. So I used to be pretty dependent on things like caffeine and sugar at one point. And to really understand what my body was going through and plan my calendar in sync with it and nourish myself with food to support it, it created so much feminine flow in my life, such a deep sense of ease and connection. And I'm so grateful for that. And that's why I'm so passionate about teaching this to other women.
Wow, Allie. So you said a lot of things. I want to double click into some of them. So, well, first of all, I'd love to talk about these 4 phases of our cycle and really, clarify them, because I think a lot of women, like you said, their understanding of their periods is like they're either on their period or they're not, right? It's like, and you also said something about when you were experiencing that 2-week, period, that your cortisol levels were really high, and this is something that's very common with women. I'm curious if you can share with us, like, why are women's cortisol levels so much higher now than before? And what are some of the things that we're doing in our day-to-day that is increasing our cortisol, which I believe impacts, progesterone and estrogen and fertility as well as your period, right? So I'd love for you to talk about cortisol, and then we can talk about the 4 phases after that.
Absolutely. Great questions. So, in modern society, we live in a fast paced Western world, very focused on consumerism and this energy of create more, do more. And what happens is there can be a lot of pressure to meet with those demands. And so not only do we have work stress, but we can also have, relationship stress if we go through a rupture and we're repairing dynamics in our relationship, or the stress of motherhood, not feeling like we have enough support, or digestion stress. Maybe we have a food sensitivity and we're not aware of that, or we don't have enough time to digest our food. Maybe we're not sleeping very well. There's so many ways that we can experience stress from our modern day society. And what happens is our adrenals, they're designed to produce hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And these hormones help us meet the stress in front of us. It's important to have a healthy stress response so that we can survive. Our body's number one mechanism is to survive. It's not fertility, it's not digestion. These things come secondary. Our number one response is to survive. So, back when we were living in the wild, if a woolly mammoth or a lion was chasing us, we need to have a proper stress response to have energy to run away or to do drastic things to keep ourselves alive. And in modern day, because of all of the different variety of stresses that I mentioned, because that is so prevalent every single day, what happens is chronic stress is occurring day in and day out. And so the adrenals can again produce that cortisol, adrenaline all throughout the day, where we're firing these hormones to keep ourselves safe. And those adrenals end up working overtime. And so, what a lot of women experience who have issues like low progesterone, estrogen dominance, high cortisol, or even challenges with thyroid hormones or irregular cycles is that the mother hormone called pregnenolone that converts and manufactures progesterone and estrogen and thyroid hormone, that mother hormone is always going to be funneled into making more cortisol and adrenaline. Because if the body is under stress and we need to survive, that's the most important function. Again, not our fertility or our digestion. So this energy that would cause us to have balanced hormones gets stolen into making more stress. And so again, if that chronic stress is there over time, women start to experience this depletion in their other hormones, and it can be very frustrating. They can feel like they're overwhelmed and on overdrive. And there's one more important piece I'd like to tie into this as well, is that for women, it wasn't until about the 1970s when the birth control contraceptive pill, which I do have some things to share about that because I was on it, and I believe that that is actually what contributed to my original imbalances with my hormones. But at the time, that was revolutionary because it allowed women the control of planning their pregnancy. And so many women finished college education, got graduate degrees, ended up climbing the corporate ladder, really excelling in their careers and postponing motherhood. But what ended up happening was, because the modern day work world was created by man and a solar rhythm, men have what is called a solar rhythm. They align with the sun rising and the sun setting. They wake up in the morning, there's high cortisol and testosterone, and the tasks get completed, and then they dwindle down at night and repeat the next day. For women, it's completely different. We're on what is called a lunar cycle, the infradian rhythm. And for us, we have these shifts of hormones throughout the month where sometimes we're meant to be resting more, and other times we have tons of energy and we're meant to go, go, go. And so when women entered the workforce, even though it was revolutionary, what also ended up happening was the need to mold and to conform to a specific work template, which just led to burnout for a lot of women and a lot of demands, which is not intrinsic or just in synergy with the natural rhythms of our body when we have wombs. And so I wanted to note that, because that is the first piece to understand. If you're burned out or you're overwhelmed or you're just feeling a lot of frustration around the stress, know that there's reasons for this that have accumulated over generations to be where we're at right now. And the liberation point is understanding the science of your hormones, understanding your hormonal rhythms so you can work with that and tend to your body in ways that are going to maximize your energy. And it comes from the enlightenment around that education. And so from there, I'd love to segue into talking about the 4 seasons, unless you have other questions. But there are these beautiful 4 phases that we go through hormonally. And I'd love to share some more about that.
Yes, yes, Allie, this is so great. I'm so grateful that you're sharing this information with our audience. I think that a lot of advice that we get, especially like a lot of podcasts, it seems like there's this kind of one category of advice given to people, like intermittent fasting, do this every single day. And I find a lot of the advice is actually really geared towards the male, testosterone cycle, like you'd mentioned, and not so much, it doesn't really take into account the four seasons that women have, especially when it comes to nutrition. So I really wanted to highlight that so much of our kind of mainstream advice doesn't feel like it's really curated for the right audience. I'll just sort of put that out there, and I feel like you've spoken to that. I also wanted to share, Spain recently passed this law that gives women a day off when they have their periods. And, I love that. I think that this has been a little bit of a controversial conversation with people in the US, and I think that it seems like that there's a lot of cultures that are now they're getting an understanding of how powerful it is to give women the right to choose whether they can take time off when they have their periods and when they have their cycles, right? And so I think that these are just important concepts that I hope will actually become more mainstream, in the common culture, that people understand that women have these four cycles. So I just wanted to highlight those two things. The advice that we're getting feels very one sort of uniformed categorically, and then the other piece is that Spain had passed this law. So I'm just curious if you have any observations on those two pieces.
Absolutely. So I smiled big when I found out about Spain passing that law. It really allows women to feel that they're backed up in the fact that this is the time of the month that rest is important. And so that made me smile. And I know there are some companies in America and there's other countries, for example, I believe it's France and other countries that also give maternity leave for mothers and fathers, which I also find incredibly amazing. And the reason for this is because the work world, as it was set up, the focus on building, consuming, creating, we need innovation, right? That's how we operate. That's how we evolve. We need that. And when we don't allow ourselves the spaciousness to rest and to do what our bodies are designed to do, there can absolutely lead to burnout. And when we have children and our babies are small, to be able to have the support and the nurturance there in infancy, that's also so important. So countries and work offices that are acknowledging those pieces around family systems and the body and our health and valuing that, in my perspective, I believe that actually adds to the growth of the building and the evolution and the innovation that we all seek, because we're taking care of the whole system. We're truly operating from a sense of feeling in harmony with our natural rhythms and in vitality. And I know for me, my most powerful ideas come when I'm feeling alive in my body. If I'm feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, my brain is not thinking the same way. In fact, when we're under stress, there's a part of the brain, the amygdala, that's like our reptile brain. It's the primal part of us that does things to survive. And there's a lot of reaction that can come without proper response. And when we're not stressed and we're able to be in a space of more rest, this is called the parasympathetic nervous system. When we're in that space, the way we think is different. It's less reactionary. It's less based on survival. So there's decisions and logic and reason that can be made, as well as the spaciousness for new innovation to flow through. So when our society in general is not operating with that constant stress in mind, I believe that we're just working with this sense of harmony that to me is far more momentum and powerful. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm also curious about the new sort of health advice that we're getting from so many people in the market. I'm just curious, what is your sort of perspective on that, on the advice just kind of being a uniform kind of piece of advice for everyone? Like it's one category of advice, right? So that's what I'm wondering, if you have any comments on that. If not, we can just keep going.
yeah, what I will speak to as being a women's health educator and coach and going through my own journey and passion of exploring different diets, I believe that there's no one size that fits all. I've explored personally everything from raw food diet to paleo to, oh my gosh, ketogenesis, the fasting lifestyle. I'm a health enthusiast. I love it all. Like, okay, there's science behind this. There's recipes that have been created specifically for this meal plan. Show it to me. Let me try it. I will do it. And what I have found is that so many things can work for different people and at different times in their life. And I will say that because there was a time in my life where I was going through some health issues and some spiritual challenges, I would say. I was really coming into myself and learning about who I was as a spiritual being in relation to my body. And I found the raw food lifestyle, and I was fasting. I was learning everything I could learn about detoxification. And my identity became intertwined with my diet. Everyone in my town knew me as the raw food girl. And and that worked for me. It worked for me for about 2 years. And then my body had different requirements. My hormones needed different minerals. My body needed warm foods. That's a whole other story. But what I will share is that my mind was fixed in the label, in the identity of what I saw myself as and what other people saw me as. And it was really hard to change, feeling like I was doing something wrong by trying on a new diet. And so that journey of letting myself, allowing and having permission to explore other foods was really liberating for me. And again, this experience of understanding our 4 phases, our 4 seasons of our hormonal shifts, I really like this concept because it works as a blueprint. And depending on what diet you are on, whether you are eating paleo or raw food, you can find something within understanding where your hormones are at and eating for your hormones at that phase. And there's no one size fits all. It's up to you and your diet. And it's also important to note that the feminine energy is cyclical in nature. It's Shakti. Shakti means the dance of the feminine. It's always changing, ever evolving, shape shifting from one form to the next. We're cyclical. We shapeshift with the moon phases. We shapeshift with the seasons. We have these 4 inner phases we go through in our bodies. And so to be able to understand that and take that perspective into the fullness of our life and apply that to the way we eat is also really powerful. Because a woman who is menstruating and working 12-hour days at her job is going to need different foods than somebody who has a less active job, right? Or for a woman who's pregnant, or for a woman who's in postpartum, or for a woman who lives in freezing cold climates, right? I used to live in the Midwest in America, and we'd get ice storms and snowstorms and not see the sun for 20-something days. And now I live in a tropical island, and the food that my body craves here is much different than what I needed when it was a cold climate in terms of the warming foods, the nourishing foods. So to know that our diets can change throughout our lives, through the cycles of womanhood, through the seasonal shifts, through the phases of our life and how much we're working, or if we're pregnant, or where we're living, or where we're traveling, to know that there can be a rhythm and flow and there's opportunity to be flexible is, to me, I feel like very, very important, because adaptability is our support in survival. And again, when we tie this back to the conversation of stress, to be adaptable really does help with longevity. It helps to shift our relationship to stress. And so for anyone who's listening to this, like if you are feeling a struggle with like maybe wanting to try on new foods, or it's like, oh my gosh, there's all these different things out there. Like, what's the right one? It really is, there's a right one for you. And know that, you get to tune into that with your body and give yourself that permission to explore what's right for you at this phase of your life.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Allie. Yeah, I love that. I really love that. And also trial and error, just really seeing how your body reacts to different foods based on where you are at hormonally. But I'd love to now dig into the 4 phases of our cycle, the 4 seasons. If you could set it up for us and just, really talk to us about like what are the 4 phases, and also what should we be kind of thinking about in each of these phases of our cycle?
This is one of my favorite topics. So this wisdom was illuminated to me when I first read the book Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom by Christiane Northrup. She's a pioneer in women's health and OBGYN. And I learned about the 4 phases. And at the time, I was on the birth control contraceptive. I was taking the pill orally each month for about 5 years. And I learned and I realized that our body has these hormonal shifts that it goes through where we're menstruating, then we're building up our uterine tissue and our hormones again. And then we are super fertile in the midpoint of our cycle. And then eventually, if we're not pregnant, we shed that uterine tissue again. The hormones become low again, and then we restart that cycle. And so this was so illuminating to me because I researched and found out that the birth control contraceptive that I was taking, it actually doesn't cause this natural rhythm to happen inside of our bodies. In fact, it puts us into essentially a pre-ovulation phase where we're never going through these 4 distinct phases because we're being supplemented with synthetic hormones. And then when the period is brought on, it's brought on by taking a sugar pill, and we're not receiving hormones. So then our body just sheds. So when I found that out, I really wanted to understand what it was like for my body to go through these phases and cycle naturally. And so that was the first step. And then another book that really took this to the next level for me was Alyssa Vitti's book, The Woman Code. And she related these 4 phases to the 4 seasons. And from that perspective, it truly brought in this cyclical rhythm of our bodies being a microcosm of the macrocosm of Earth, of the seasonal shifts, of the moon phases. And it tapped me into something so much bigger than just myself. It made me feel so much more connected. So those 4 phases, I'll describe what they are, and I'll share the science of the shifts as well as how they relate to the seasonal shifts. And I love to tie in the moon phases too. That was the workshop you attended at the festival called Moon Cycle Nutrition, where I taught a cooking class and talked about these 4 phases in relation to the moon phases. So I'll tie that into. So 4 phases: menstrual phase, follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and luteal phase. Now, each of these phases aren't exactly a week. Each of them have their own rhythm depending on your own body. So just please note that, because there are a lot of apps out there you can download to track your cycle, and they're very general. But depending on how early you ovulate or how late your menstrual cycle, your period, your menstrual phase will start earlier or later. So this is why tracking your cycle and understanding it is so powerful, because you can come into rhythm with your own body and even come into the place of understanding when you ovulate and then predict when your period is coming, which I found so helpful as being a business owner and planning out my schedule in according to my menstrual cycle. So the menstrual phase is considered day 1 of your cycle. And it's really easy to know when you're in your menstrual phase because you're bleeding. And so in your menstrual phase, your uterine tissue is shedding, your hormones are dropping. So estrogen, progesterone that might have been elevated are now dropping and returning to a low level. Also, what's happening is the right and the left hemispheres of the brain are more synced at this time of your cycle. And so we need to rest, okay? We're shedding our uterine tissue, which has a lot of minerals that we're losing in our blood loss. And so resting and eating foods like bone broth or nettle tea or soups and stews that are full of minerals and seaweeds, things like that are going to really support our body at this time. And it's important to rest and really replenish. And when I mentioned how the right and the left hemispheres of the brain are more synced, this is important to note because in many different ancient cultures, it was known that when a woman was bleeding, that she was like the oracle. She was deeply connected to the divine. And when our brain is synced up like that, this is the time of the month where epiphanies can come through if we're allowing ourselves the spaciousness and the stillness to rest and receive those epiphanies. So for me, I love journaling. I love dancing. I love just allowing myself some more sense of just being, just allowing myself to just feel, be, rest. And so many downloads come through about where I want to put my creative intentions, my creative energy the month ahead. And so this is essentially like the season of winter, right? In winter, we're in rebirth. And it also relates to the moon phase, the dark moon, the new moon. And it's a time where things kind of seem dark and quiet, but it's a time of that inner stillness, self-reflection, and receiving those downloads again. So that when we come out of this hibernation of our inner winter, and then now we have estrogen rising again, and that's what's growing our uterine tissue that starts to rebuild inside of our womb. And then the hormone FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, also rises. And this causes 15 to 20 eggs to be released from our ovaries and to start growing on our ovaries in these follicles. That's why it's called follicular phase. The follicular phase, it's those follicles that the eggs are growing and maturing in. That's how you can remember it. And so those eggs are growing, those eggs are released. Those eggs, to me, I see them represent, if you're not wanting to make a baby that month, it can represent creative ideas, creative energy. So knowing what it is that you want to infuse your creative energy into that month is so helpful, because as these hormones start to rise and these eggs are released and your energy is growing, you know where to place that creative intention. You know what actions to take, and you suddenly start to feel really excited to come out of your hibernation, to start taking action. You feel invigorated with new ideas. So that is your follicular phase, and it represents the energy of spring. Because in spring, when we're coming out of winter, those plants are shooting up from the soil and the sun is bright. Everything's awakening. It's spring, right? So that is our inner spring. And then this relates to the waxing moon. So you think about the new moon. The waxing moon is now when it's starting to become full again. It's about halfway. It's starting to become full again. So this phase, depending on how long your menstrual cycle is, maybe your menstrual cycle is 3 days, maybe it's 7 days, this phase will happen when you stop bleeding. And then this phase will end, your inner spring, depending on when you start to experience cervical fluid. This indicates that you're going into your next phase called the ovulatory phase. And the ovulatory phase is about 3 to 5 days for every person. It happens about mid-cycle. And the ovulatory phase, the cervical fluid that I'm talking about, it's different than arousal fluid. Arousal fluid is made from the walls of your vagina. It's when you're aroused, it's lubrication. Your cervical fluid comes from your cervix, which hangs down. It's like the mouth of your womb. Such a beautiful portal. That's where babies come through. That's where blood passes through. And also this juicy cervical fluid, which anytime that is present, its purpose is to nourish sperm and keep sperm alive. So if that fluid is present and you make love during that time, you have unprotected sex, whenever that fluid is present, it's going to nourish sperm. So then eventually at the very end of your ovulatory phase, one of those eggs that have been growing on your ovaries in those follicles, one of them is going to become the biggest and the most dominant, and it's going to burst through the follicle with the support of high estrogen levels and the luteinizing hormone, LH. That's another hormone that surges during ovulatory phase. That egg will burst through, and the sperm will meet the egg and create that point of conception. So that is what our body is designed to do, right? It's for fertility. So when you track that fluid and you know when that's present and you're seeing that you have that for several days, you will know you're in your ovulatory phase. You'll also know that you're in your ovulatory phase because your libido will be ramped up, and you will also feel expressive. You'll feel flirty. That's due to high estrogen levels. And you may also feel more like, if you're one of those people that love task lists and just crossing things off, you'll be crushing that task list typically around that phase of your cycle, because you actually have higher levels of testosterone. And testosterone is considered a male hormone, and women have high peaks of it during their ovulatory phase. That's what enhances our libido. It's baby making time concoction, nature's way of supporting us. But it also helps us feel very direct and get the task done. So I love to do workouts at this time because it's a great time to build muscle, as well as have podcasts and things like this one. I'm ovulating, so I'm loving talking to you right now. We get stuff done.
I love this so much. And what do you eat around the ovulatory phase that could be helpful, or even the phase right before it? I'm going to mispronounce it. The luteal phase. What do you eat for that? Oh my gosh, follicular! I mix it up. Yeah. What do you eat for those two phases?
Yeah. So as earlier I mentioned, in the menstrual phase, we want these warming, mineral, heavy foods, right? Because we're losing the blood. And it's important to replenish. And those warm foods also support with circulation to our womb. And when we're shifting out of that phase, we're going to need different foods. So those follicles that have the eggs that are maturing, what helps to nourish those follicles in the follicular and the ovulatory phase are foods that are high in the antioxidant vitamin E. And you can find vitamin E in avocados, in almonds, sunflower seeds, if you like nut butters, almond butter, things like that. And that is going to help to support healthy maturation and follicle growth. And also at this time, if you think of the energy of spring, it's a very young, youthful energy. So you can think about foods that also have that energetic. So microgreens, sprouts, as well as eggs. These are all very young foods, and they're compacted with nutrients. So having this for your body is really supportive, as well as foods that are high in other antioxidants. So think about berries. Maybe you want to make a yummy smoothie or top a salad with berries. Things like that are going to be really helpful and supportive at this phase of your cycle. And you might notice that you don't actually feel as hungry during your ovulatory phase as you do your luteal phase, which we're going to get into the luteal phase next. And I spend a lot of time here in the luteal phase because this is the longest phase. There's so much that happens in this phase. But you're going to notice that you might not feel as hungry during your ovulatory phase as you do your luteal phase. And that's because in the luteal phase, as progesterone is the next hormone that gets the floor and starts to become the most dominant one, it actually requires about 200 to 300 more calories to create it. We metabolically burn more, 200 to 300 more calories. So we're naturally a bit hungrier at that time of the month. And so just notice your body. Notice, I'm not really hungry right now when you're ovulating, versus then when you get into your luteal phase or your late luteal phase where you're quote unquote PMSing. I believe PMS stands for please make space. We can get into that. But just notice, track this.
Oh, I so love that so much. Okay, so there's so much great advice here. This is why I took so many notes the first time I sat down. So I love the recommendations that you made for what to eat in each phase of a cycle. And then I think we still had the one last phase after ovulatory phase. And so this last phase, you said it lasts the longest. How long does it usually last?
So this phase will last 10 to 14 days per person. And so earlier when I said, if you're tracking with an app for your menstrual cycle and it says you're going to get your period on this day, but then you get your period early and it confuses you, that's because whenever you ovulate, the day after you ovulate, you go into your luteal phase, and the luteal phase is 10 to 14 days. During your luteal phase, either that conception happens or it doesn't. And so at the end of the phase, your body will know, okay, I don't need to produce more progesterone. I'm not pregnant. I don't need to nourish this pregnancy. And so progesterone levels will drop, all the hormones will drop, and then you'll start to release the uterine tissue. And so you can track that your period after you ovulate, if you know when you ovulate and when you finish, because that cervical fluid will start to dry up, you will know that your period's coming to 10 to 14 days later, and you can plan for that. And so this phase is the longest, right? It takes up a lot of the menstrual cycle. And in the beginning of this phase, a lot of women still feel higher energy levels, more expressive. They still feel that energy that they might be feeling in their inner summer, their ovulatory phase, which again, bringing this into the moon, it's that full moon illumination phase. And the full moon, when we're in ritual practices, the word moon cycle manifestation, that's a huge conversation in just more esoteric communities. It's the energy of release. That moon is illuminated, and soon it's going to start to contract and wane. And so when you think about that in relation to our menstrual cycle, we're releasing our egg, we're releasing it. And so it's so beautiful to feel that illumination, that high energy. And then we go into the luteal phase. And so eventually, a couple days into the luteal phase, progesterone is going to be elevated. And progesterone is a hormone that is so necessary for building and sustaining and thickening our uterine tissue. So if we did become pregnant, that we could, hold that pregnancy, preventing miscarriage. So progesterone does support that. And also what progesterone does is it's a hormone that helps us feel calm, and it makes us feel like we want to ground and nest. So if you think about pregnant mothers, usually they're nesting, right? And the problem, though, for many of us that might have low progesterone levels, and I know, I had low progesterone for many moon cycles, menstrual cycles of my life. If we don't have enough progesterone, we might experience early spotting, where there is brown or early spotting coming out before we actually start our bleed. And we also might experience a lot of anxiety, because remember, progesterone is supposed to make us feel calm. And so there are ways that we can support progesterone production through our diet, through our lifestyle practices. And so it's so important to focus on this at this part of our cycle. So important. I found that supporting my body out of all of the phases, if I could really focus on this piece, it was when I got that down, it felt like the other phases were easier to flow with. And so first thing is, knowing that your body is going to require more nutrients. Again, we metabolically burn 200 to 300 more calories. Planning for that. If we don't plan for it, we might be grabbing carbs and sugary treats all throughout the day because we're hungry. Instead, what you can do is plan for more healthy fats, clean protein. If you're vegan or vegetarian, adding in tempeh or beans, making sure that you've got protein sources. If you're not vegetarian, adding in, the meats. And I really loved organ meat when I was healing my menstrual cycle because it's packed with nutrition. So adding that into your diet, and then also healthy fats. So in your smoothies, adding almond butter or coconut butter or avocado on top of your salads, cooking with good healthy fat like avocado oil or coconut oil or sesame oil. There's a lot of fats out there like canola oil that are very high in omega-6s that can create a lot of inflammation in the body. And we do not want more inflammation in the body in our luteal phase because it can contribute to cramping. So just know you're going to be hungrier at this time, and that's okay. So what's the abundance of food options that you can eat? Like, get excited, plan ahead, allow your cravings to guide you into some more delicious ways of eating.
I love this so much. I'm actually in this phase right now towards the end of it. So I was like, oh, it's a very good strategy to only book podcast interviews during the ovulatory phase. It's an amazing strategy. I'm like, why have I not done that going forward? I will. And in this phase, as you're kind of getting near your period, it's so interesting how progesterone, I didn't actually realize that until your workshop about progesterone. Are there ways that we can test our progesterone levels? Like, do you know of any ways that, or any ways we can do that on like a regular basis? Just because I imagine it's so important, especially in these like 10 to 14 days.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best time of your monthly cycle to test for progesterone would be after you ovulate. So if you are tracking your cycle, it's about day 21 for most women when progesterone levels are where they need to be adequately. And make sure you ask and advocate when you're in your doctor's office asking for a test. Ask for the estrogen to progesterone ratio, because that's what's going to help you see if you have estrogen dominance or not. It's the ratio of estrogen to progesterone that makes it whether you're estrogen dominant or not. And so that's important to test for. And you can absolutely find that out. And I just want to note too, I don't always do all my podcasts in the ovulatory phase. I actually love right before I bleed doing podcasts. And that's because at this time, just to hear a little bit more about the hormonal science, progesterone is going to be the main predominant hormone throughout this luteal phase. But then right before we bleed, estrogen is going to kick back up. And again, estrogen makes us very expressive and animated. And if our hormones are in right relationship at this time, a lot of people might feel, instead of the PMS, like, this is all crazy, you might actually feel really powerful and really expressive, like you're in your wild woman power. And so for me, I really love being on podcasts the day before I bleed because it's a heightened time for me. And so to also note that because estrogen levels do kick back up right before we start to bleed, it's really important that we're eating foods that support our liver in our luteal phase. So eating cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, whatever the way you like to cook them, whether it's sauteed or in an omelet or steamed or with Szechuan sauce, like eat them. Because when your liver breaks them down, it produces a thing called indole 3 carbinol, which helps metabolize excess estrogen. And if you are challenged with estrogen dominance or estrogen and progesterone levels, that's going to help bring your system back into balance. And then also when you think about the season of fall, which correlates to luteal phase, as well as the waning moon contracting, thinking about foods that ground you. So foods that are under the earth, like sweet potatoes. I love eating sweet potatoes during my luteal phase. And plus they're sweet, right? They've got a little sweet kick to them. You can cinnamon on top of it. And that's a complex carbohydrate that can support your blood sugar levels, which is another thing to really be aware of at this time. Because again, stress that we have, we're always gonna, that energy is gonna funnel into making more cortisol and adrenaline instead of progesterone. So if you can, support your stress levels, and blood sugar and stress are so interlinked. If you can make sure you're honoring your blood sugar with the healthy fats, clean protein, the veggies, and fiber from like sweet potatoes, the complex carbohydrates, this is going to be such a gift to your body. You're going to be feeling like superwoman right before you bleed.
I love this, Allie. This is so great. I remember in your workshop, you mentioned this at one point in the cycle, but it was really game-changing for me. You said that we should be soaking our nuts and seeds. And I'd love for you to share, why is that important? I've noticed a difference when I started doing it. So that's why I brought it up.
So the reason why we soak our nuts and seeds, I learned this when I was studying raw food culinary, is because when those nuts and seeds are soaked, they have these things called enzyme inhibitors on their shells. And those enzyme inhibitors are nature's way of protecting that plant. So eventually it can germinate and grow and sprout. And what happens to us when we take that into our body is it protects the nut and seed, but it creates an inflammatory response in our gut. And so when we soak it, when you're soaking seeds, right, under soil and they receive that moisture, they begin to germinate and they become alive. And so when you soak them and then you rinse them, that's the same practice. They start to germinate. Those enzyme inhibitors are released in the water. They're rinsed off, and they make them more bioavailable, more digestible for your body. And it's important to note that this is only with raw nuts and seeds. If they've already been salted and dry roasted and there's maple syrup or sugar on top of them, this is not the same case. This is only if you are eating, raw walnuts or raw almonds, things like that, to soak them. It's really helpful and to digest them. And, not everybody has a problem with digesting nuts and seeds, but for a lot of people who have hormonal imbalances, oftentimes it's a gut issue. There's inflammation in the gut. And so if that's your case, or if every time you eat nuts and seeds, there's you get breakouts or your stomach hurts, just be aware of that and perhaps purchase raw nuts and seeds and see about soaking them for about 8 hours, rinsing them, and then eating them that way.
Great. Yeah. You said it was 8 hours. I remember that. So amazing. So this interview just flew by. I still have a couple more questions, and I know that we're almost at time. So I wanted to also ask you about the moon. You keep bringing up the moon, the waxing and waning of the moon. And it's interesting because my cycle is actually very much in alignment with the full moon and the full moon with my cycle. So I'm just, curious, why is the moon such an important piece of these 4 phases? If you could explain that.
So the moon, when it is closest to the earth, it's either new or full. And the moon has a gravitational pull on water. That's why we observe experiences with the ocean and the tides. And our bodies are made up of 74% water. And so when you think about your womb is made up of water. It is releasing menstrual fluids. It is releasing ovulatory fluids. And there are studies that now show that most women are either ovulating or bleeding on the new or the full moon. So that's really wild to know that we have that connection to the moon through that gravitational pull. But also, feminine energy is seen as cyclical. It's flowy, it's in rhythm. It's different than masculine energy, which again correlates to the sun. It's direct, it's, rises and then falls every day. We have this lunar rhythm, and most menstrual cycles, the entire duration of that cycle of those 4 seasons, happen in about 28 days, which the moon goes through its rotation in about a 28-day cycle. So there's that deep connection of the lunar phases shifting that we also see in our hormonal rhythms. And to bring this into more of a feminine, ritual-based understanding as well, when we are bleeding on the new moon, our creative energy is said to be cultivating inward. It's about this rebirth that we are going through with ourselves, and perhaps we're desiring to make a baby, or perhaps we're desiring to rebirth ourselves and our relationship to ourselves, because we're always changing, we're always growing. But then there's some of us that bleed on the full moon. And so you might ask, well, what does that say about me? And so there's teachings that say that for women that are bleeding on the full moon, what they're doing is birthing their energy for the collective paradigm shift. So if you have a business and you're a thought leader and you're holding space for bringing these new concepts, essentially birthing new creative concepts into the world, you might be bleeding more often on the full moon. And I know for me, I tend to shift back and forth, and those who are listening might notice, this is interesting. I'm bleeding on the full moon this cycle. Tune into that and observe, where are you at in terms of your creative life force energy? Does it feel very internal? Are you focusing on the inner growth, or do you feel like you're pretty extroverted and you're serving and you're giving? It's important to note that because it can tell you a lot about how you're harmonizing with your own creative power.
Wow, it's so powerful. Really, really fascinating. And Allie, what about the womb? You also talk about womb health. Why is nourishing our womb so important?
So our womb, it is that rhythm of life and compost death. We see this every single month that we build, we expand, we release, we contract, we let go. And it's so powerful to tune into that rhythm because, again, the solar rhythm of go, do, create more. We're going to burn ourselves out if we're tuning to that rhythm. When we're attuned to the natural rhythm of I am reserving, I am purifying, I'm going within, I am releasing, and now I'm ready to rebirth. And I have all this creative vision that I received in my menstrual phase, and now the energy to carry it out. We're working in harmony with what our womb's blueprint is designed to do. And so the power of the womb and tuning into it as that, as a cauldron that gestates and harnesses our creative energy and composts out old ways of being and expressing ourselves, it's powerful. It is so powerful. And unfortunately, many of us in Western culture don't have a relationship with our womb because as we're growing up, we're told that our period is a curse. It's going to bring pain and it might lead to pregnancy. If we're not ready to have pregnancy, we might fear our womb. And so we disconnect. But when we see that our womb, when we're in rhythm with it, that our periods do not have to be painful, they are not a curse, that they actually can be pain-free, we can feel powerful, clear, receive spiritual guidance, downloads, epiphanies, that is actually possible. And that also we can know our cycle and plan for pregnancy by working with our cycle. It totally shifts us into this empowerment of creating our life from our creative power center. And so I believe it's so important to have a dialogue and a relationship with our womb. And in order to do that, oftentimes we have to feel and release all the junk we've inherited about what the womb is and the curse that our cycle is. We get to release that. It's not true. We can absolutely feel in more harmony and peace with our body in its natural rhythm of what it's designed to do. It's absolutely possible.
Wow. So it's so inspiring to hear this. I really, really appreciate this. Allie, what sort of things have kind of surprised you the most looking back on your journey?
I would say what has most surprised me is that I receive more and I feel more alive when I'm surrendered rather than trying and proving and going out and getting it. The more that I am in this surrendered state, my heart opens. And I notice that the things that I want so much in life that I thought I had to strategize and plan out with these very specific goals, they come to me in so many blessings from so many angles in so many different ways. And that very essence of receiving is a feminine quality. It is what the feminine energy is designed to do. With our bodies releasing eggs and receiving sperm to fertilize it, our energy is receptive by nature if we can surrender, if we can feel, if we can be in that energy. And so for me, that was a big illumination because when I created my business and I thought I had to do all these things in order for it to grow, when I learned how to receive and be in my heart and surrender, that's when the biggest blessings of life showed up.
Wow. Allie, this is so great. I'm so happy that you are a guest on our show and sharing this amazing information that is so powerful, an incredible reminder, especially in our society today where it feels like we have to, kind of be aggressive or assertive in getting things, to work our way. And I could not agree with you more that this surrender, this feminine quality of surrender is actually just, it's so our birthright, but so many women and actually men who also have the feminine within them are not really activating and using that. So it's just such a powerful reminder. And Allie, what do you want to tell our listeners about their health, wellness, well-being? What's your main takeaway and call to action?
I invite you to look within for the answers. There's so much inspiration out there in books, on podcasts like this one. Take in this information, absorb it, become inspired, but attune to your body and your body's wisdom. Trust your body and let this inspiration become something that helps you get to know yourself more intimately in order to create the rhythm, the lifestyle practices, the diet, the things that are really going to be in harmony with your own life.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Wow. And so are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you, learn more about your work? Where can we find you?
So I love hanging out on social media. You'll find me on Instagram, Modern Goddess Lifestyle. You can also check out my website, www.moderngoddesslifestyle.com. On there, I have a free gift that helps you tune into your creative energy, that helps you understand your connection to your womb wisdom and learn how to embody it. It's a 4-day free online challenge. So I invite you to check that out if that is inspiring you.
Amazing, amazing. We'll also include all these links in the show notes so that people can find you directly. Allie, thank you so much for your time. This was so enriching, and I know it's going to help so many people who are listening in right now. I just could not be happier with all this great information. So thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
For our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about moon cycle nutrition with Allie McFee, and you can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again.